Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. We love to get into the nitty-gritty of all things business, and today we're tackling a phenomenon that can really trip us up, the halo effect.
It's everywhere, right? This sneaky cognitive bias pops up everywhere we look, from how we judge a new product to how CEOs are evaluated.
It's like our brains love taking shortcuts sometimes. But those shortcuts, they can lead to some pretty big misunderstandings, especially in the business world where decisions have real consequences.
Exactly. At its core, the halo effect is this tendency to judge something or someone based on a single, often superficial trait.
Oh, totally. Like
Yeah.
when you see someone dressed to the nines, let's say, in a perfectly tailored suit, and you automatically think, wow, they must be super intelligent and competent. But clothes can be deceiving.
Precisely, and that's the danger, right? This bias goes way beyond just our personal impressions. It can color our perception of entire companies' products, even whole industries.
Oh, I can just hear our friend Allan Smithee now. He'd probably say something like, don't be fooled by a fancy office building or a CEO with a winning smile. He'd want us to dig deeper. Look at the numbers, the hard data. That's what tells the real story.
Right on. Ellen's onto something there. That halo effect, it can make a company seem much more or much less valuable than it actually is.
Think about those companies that have a string of hit products. Everyone's buzzing about them. Investors are throwing money their way. But what if their underlying business model? What if it's not as solid as it seems? That halo, it can hide a lot of cracks.
Absolutely. Past performance is not indicative of future results. It's a cliche for a reason. And a great example of the halo effect in action is the case of Cisco Systems.
Oh yeah. Back during the dot-com boom, Cisco could do no wrong. Their stock was sky high. Everyone was praising their strategy of snapping up all these smaller companies.
But then when the bubble burst, you know what happened. Suddenly that same strategy looked way too risky. Reckless even. But the interesting thing is, Cisco's actual operations didn't change that much overnight. What changed was how people perceived them.
It just goes to show how powerful those assumptions, those first impressions can be. Even in the business world, we're not immune.
Not at all. And that's why it's so crucial to be aware of this bias, to develop a more critical eye, especially when it comes to business writing.
Oh, Alan would have a field day with this one. He'd tell us to be wary of those business books promising the magic formula for success. You know the ones, they make it sound so easy, like if you just follow these steps, you're guaranteed to be the next big thing.
He'd be right to be skeptical. Those formulas often fall into the trap of what we call the delusion of absolute performance, this idea that a fixed set of actions always equals success. It just doesn't hold up in the real world. Business is way too dynamic for that. Always changing.
So you're saying it's not enough to just try and copy someone else's success story?
Exactly. Every business, every leader operates within a unique context. What worked for one company might be a disaster for another.
Which brings us back to critical thinking, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. We need to be able to really dissect the information we encounter, especially in business writing. Separate the substance from the hype.
It's like that green analyst tactic Alan used to talk about. He'd downplay his own expertise, almost play dumb, to encourage the other person to explain things in the simplest terms.
Brilliant, right. It disarmed people. By positioning himself as a novice, he could expose any flawed logic or shaky assumptions.
He was basically removing his own halo, so to speak, to get a clearer view of what was really going on.
And that's something we can all learn from. When you're reading a business report and analysis, don't just be impressed by fancy credentials.
So we need to look beyond the jargon and the titles.
Exactly. Focus on the evidence presented, the logic of the arguments, and the clarity of the writing itself.
Because even the most beautifully written report, if the underlying data is flawed or the analysis is superficial, it's not worth the paper it's printed on. It's like they say, right, don't judge a book by its cover. Or I guess in this case, don't judge a business report by its author's fancy credentials.
Exactly. And speaking of judging, we've talked a lot about how this halo effect can lead us astray. But is it always a bad thing? Is there ever such a thing as a good halo?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So you're saying there are times when those positive qualities we're seeing, they're actually legit.
Right. Our research mentions this idea of a true halo. where those initially positive impressions are actually rooted in reality.
So not just a trick of the light then. Tell me more about this true halo. How does that work?
Okay, so let's say you're thinking about partnering with another company. And this company, they've got a fantastic track record. They seem to have a knack for spotting great opportunities, stellar industry reputation, everyone's singing their praises.
Sounds like a classic halo effect situation so far.
It could be, but here's where that true halo comes in. If you dig a little deeper, you do your homework, and their past successes, they hold up under scrutiny. Their decision-making process, it's solid. Their reputation, it's actually well-deserved.
Then maybe, just maybe, that positive impression you had at the beginning, maybe it was right on the money.
Precisely. It doesn't mean we should just throw caution to the wind, but it's about recognizing that sometimes those gut feelings, those positive first impressions, they're based on something real. The key, of course, is verification. We can't just assume.
So trust your gut, but then back it up with some serious due diligence.
Exactly. Allan Smithee, he'd be all over this. Put on your skeptical hats, folks, he'd say. Don't just accept what you're told at face value. He'd want us to look for that independent verification, proof that those glowing reports, those impressive credentials, they're more than just smoke and mirrors.
We've got to separate that genuine competence from a carefully crafted image.
Speaking of images, it's important to remember that the halo effect can influence how we interpret visual cues in business too.
Oh, you mean like how a company presents itself, like their logo, their marketing materials, that kind of thing?
Exactly. A sleek logo, a really well-designed website. Those things can create this aura of sophistication and success, even if the company's actual products or services, let's just say they don't quite live up to the hype.
Perception versus reality. It could be a tricky gap to bridge.
And it cuts both ways too, right? A website that looks like it's stuck in the 90s, outdated branding, that could lead us to underestimate a company, even if they've got a killer product that everyone loves.
It's like we need to be so mindful of how these visual cues, even subconscious ones, are shaping our judgments.
Absolutely. And that's where a healthy dose of skepticism comes in. Question those assumptions. Look beyond the surface. Don't let those first impressions completely dictate your opinion.
That's easy to say, but our brains are kind of wired for those snap judgments, aren't they?
True, but we can train ourselves to be more aware. One powerful strategy is to actively seek out different perspectives.
You mean like getting input from people with different backgrounds, different experiences?
Exactly. Talking to people who see the world differently than you do. It can help us challenge our own assumptions. See those potential blind spots we might have missed.
It's like they say, two heads are better than one. Or in this case, maybe two heads with different halos are better than one.
Love it. And don't underestimate the power of just taking a step back, giving yourself time to process information before making a decision. Don't feel pressured to rush to judgment.
Give yourself time to do your research, to really think things through.
Right. And when it comes to business writing specifically, remember clarity and objectivity. Those are key.
So we should avoid getting swept up in flowery language or overly persuasive rhetoric.
Exactly. Look for clear, concise writing that presents evidence, supports its claims with solid data.
And don't be afraid to ask questions. If something doesn't make sense or seems a little too good to be true, it probably is.
Exactly. Critical thinking, that's our best defense against the halo effect.
It's about becoming more aware of our own biases, learning to evaluate information objectively, really training our minds to see past the glare of that halo.
And sometimes it's about channeling our inner Allan Smithee.
Putting on that detective hat and digging for the truth.
Precisely.
Trust but verify.
Yeah.
Especially in the business world, right? When the stakes are high, we can't let those halos blind us to potential red flags.
Couldn't agree more. And recognizing the halo effect, that's just the first step. We've got to actively work to counter its influence on our decisions.
It's like we're training our brains to see past the glare, to really evaluate things objectively.
Exactly. And here's something important to remember. Even the most seasoned professionals, even those at the top of their game, they can fall prey to the halo effect. It's not a sign of weakness. It's just how our brains are wired.
But understanding that wiring, that's what gives us the power to make smarter decisions. It's like having X-ray vision, helping us see past those surface impressions, like you said, those seemingly perfect deals or those leaders with all the charisma. We can cut through that and see what's really there.
Exactly. When we recognize that our perceptions can be skewed, we level the playing field. We can make more objective, more rational, and ultimately more successful choices.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the halo effect, what's one key takeaway you hope our listeners will walk away with?
Don't underestimate the power of critical thinking. It might sound simple, but it's crucial. Whether you're looking at a new investment opportunity or trying to assess a potential hire, or even just reading an article that really grabs your attention, always question those assumptions. Look for evidence. Don't just take things at face value. And be ready to challenge those glowing first impressions.
Wise words. And hey, you know what? That next business book you pick up, the one with the flashy cover and the big promises, don't be so quick to buy into the hype. There just might be a skeptical engineer lurking between those pages, urging you to think twice before jumping in.
And to always do your own due diligence.
Until next time, everyone keep those minds sharp and those halos in check.